Hey guys, it's me Tiffany and welcome back to my channel. So this is the third and final part of 31 books in 31 days. If this is the first one you've clicked on, I'm just going to say this here. I did it in 3 parts so I could talk a little bit more about each book without either having an extremely long video, and also it keeps me from being too tired. Like, talking about 31 books back to back would be insane. Doing 10 is enough. Ooh. So the first book I read was The Empress of Salt and Fortune. This was like a 120-page novella. It is beautiful. Man, it's beautiful. I don't want to get too much into the plot just because of how short it is, but according to Goodreads, I think there's going to be 5 of these. 2 are published. I read both. I want the other 3 now. And this is basically through the eyes of a handmaiden watching like in ancient China, watching a political marriage, and they travel with her to, because you just get sent up north, right? And our main character is non-binary, and it feels so natural, and there are so many strong women in this book, and there's a lot of stories, and somehow in this 120-page book, the world feels so immersive. I don't feel like I just read 120 pages. Somehow, like, it drops you into the world, and normally I'd be scared that, like, there wouldn't be enough world building or enough character development. But somehow, this has accomplished almost more than a lot of thicker books I've read that are in the fantasy genre. And this has so much feminism in it. It has, like, everything just feels so natural and so organic. And man, if you have like any time to read this, and it shouldn't take long, I would definitely recommend it. I've heard great things about the audiobook, but I personally didn't go that route. But yeah, I would definitely recommend this. So just like the first book, this is the second novella in the series because there was only 2 out, and I wanted to read these back to back. I don't know if I want to go into detail just the same because this was like 123 pages. But apparently you don't have to read these in order, because even though like our main character is the same, it's like just chronicles of their journey or their life. So you could go out of order, even though like I personally couldn't because it would feel weird. So there is a noticeable absence of maleness in this, and honestly, I really like that. Just because fantasy is so male-driven, usually, and our main character comes across hungry tigers who want to listen to stories, and basically, if they don't hear the story they like, they threaten to eat our main character. And it's interesting because sometimes they hear the same story that is told to them, but they have a different perspective, and it kind of goes into, like, just because everybody, like, hears the same story doesn't mean they know the story the same way. And this one feels a little bit more like, because they're basically all in the same area for most of this novella, so you don't see as much of the world, but it kind of shows you like maybe like philosophies or values that are within this. And it's interesting to see like the dynamics of our main character and the tigers is so interesting. So yeah, definitely pick up both books of this. Everything's just so fluid, so amazing, and yeah, I really want the other 3 out now if Goodreads is correct, and there's going to be 5. So the third book that I read is American Panda. So I noticed most people try to sell this book as a cute contemporary romance between a Taiwanese girl and a Japanese guy. Yes, that's in there, but this book is so much more than that. This book is so much more. And honestly, I feel like the romance is not even the biggest plot in the book. It's just a plot that naturally is in there, which the romance is like a no-no from her parents. So basically, this is a girl whose parents immigrated from Taiwan, and they want her to go to doctor path, and she's in MIT. Her parents are controlling, and they want what's best for her. So they think that her and her brother's life got to be like on this set, strict plan so they can have the best life, because that's what they want especially when they came from another country here to the United States, right? And she's scared to stand up for herself because when her brother did over a relationship, he got completely excommunicated. Like, completely. It's not an exaggeration. So that is a real concern for her. Like, she's not even allowed to talk to her brother. And she graduated high school early to be set on this path. And, like, there's a lot of pressures to be a doctor, especially if she doesn't want to do it, especially since she's a germaphobe. And she's always carrying hand sanitizer, and she's always panicking over any idea of, like, any germs. And honestly, that is not the best bet for a doctor. But, you know, there's a lot of, like, pressures, and then she's trying to navigate, like, her Taiwanese culture with the American culture, and she wants a relationship back with her brother, which she does reach out. And that was beautiful. That was so beautiful to see. And her relationship with her love interest, because he's of Japanese descent, and the conflicts that's happened between Taiwan and Japan, that's like a no-go from her parents as well. Like, her parents want her to marry somebody they choose worthy. And, you know, it talks so much about culture and expectations and, like, parenting and how she needs to stand up for herself, but that's hard. Like, there's a lot of times in life that, like, some people have true consequences if they decide to go their own path. And I think this book navigates this so well. And yeah, like, if you want to read this physically, the font size is great too. I don't know if that matters to most people, but it does to me. And the font size is really nice. It's not overly large, but it's easy to read, like, physically. Like, just on, like, a, you know, not, like, vocabulary and stuff, but I do think the vocabulary it's not super flowery, but it is kind of simple, and I don't think it's hard to understand the messages and the nuances in this book. So yeah, this one was a great read too. So far, 3 out of 3 great. You know how I said 3 out of 3 were great? Number 4, I did not like. I'm sorry. It is a beloved classic, and I've only read one other book about this author. The Tale of Two Cities. I thought I was really, really going to enjoy this. The only other book I read by him was A Christmas Carol, and, you know, it was okay. Like, I enjoyed it. It was short. But, man, I did not like this book, and I thought I would because I do think, like, the French Revolution is, like, an interesting part of history, but, like, every time I read, like, a fictional book on it, I don't enjoy it. So I don't know if, like, maybe it's not for me, or I just haven't read the right book for me. But it talks about, like, London and France, and it goes, like, before the revolution and then, like, through the revolution. And this was written, I think, like, 50 years after the revolution, and this book was so wordy. Like, I feel like some of these words could have been cut out. I think at the time this is written, I read somewhere that the chapters were coming out, like, monthly or weekly or something. Like, it wasn't produced as, like, a full book, right? And just published. And I really feel like this shows that Dickens was being paid by the word, because the descriptions are sometimes too long, and it feels like it kind of rambles to get to the point, to be honest, and that's just my opinion. I feel like there was a great story here, but it was just too drawn out, and this should have been shorter. And somehow, even though it's super, super wordy, the characters just felt two-dimensional, and I just couldn't jive with them. I couldn't be sympathetic with them. I just, like, how is it too wordy, but then the characters fall flat? I don't know, but that's how this felt. I will say that, like, I think he does a good job showing how bad the poverty was in France, and, like, the differences, like, with the nobility and stuff. And, like, I think it's interesting because, like, I feel like a lot of places don't talk about how the English were scared of a revolution because they had, like, economic differences between their social classes as well, even though the French like to revolt. And I do think it did a good job, like, showing the differences and, like, how some characters are all about just business. But it still fell flat. It still felt flat. And I think this story could have been so good if it was just shorter. This wasn't for me. And I was actually really excited to read this because I thought I would truly, truly enjoy it. But I really, I picked it because I recognized the name, to be honest. Like, I didn't even realize it was about the French Revolution until I actually got the book and I noticed the cover. And I was like, huh, you know? But I knew Charles Dickinson wrote this quote, but some reason I thought it was like in Great Expectations or something. But as I said, I've only read A Christmas Carol. But the quote, it was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was an age of wisdom. It was an age of foolishness. Like, I think everybody's heard that at some point, but I didn't realize it was in this book. I just knew it was by Charles Dickinson. So yeah, at least I finally read the book that I've heard the quote like a million times, right? So the next one is a manga, and I enjoy this so much more. But it was called I Had That Dream Again. This is like the collected bundle edition with the entire series in it. I think it's 3 volumes if you read them individually. And this was so beautiful. This was like the same author who wrote I Want to Eat Your Pancreas, and I read that last year, and that was beautiful as well. I think I Want to Eat Your Pancreas made me a little sad, a little bit more than this, but I still think this is beautiful. I think the plot's a little predictable, but, honestly, that didn't kill this for me. So our main character, she's a kid, and she has, like, an assignment to figure out, like, what happiness is by her teacher. And, like, most kids would talk about candy and stuff, and so she starts talking to other women. And one's a high school student who self-harms, which there is self-harm in this, and you actually see her cutting herself. So if that is a trigger for you. Then there's like a young adult woman, like she's not high school, but she's not old. And she's outcasted by society, and our main character mistakes a slur on her door as her name, and the woman, she just laughs at it, right? Because she tries to be respectful. And then there's an older woman that she frequents as well, and she becomes friends with these 3 women. And one thing I love about this is we got our main character who is a young child, then we have a high schooler, then we have a woman, and then we have an elderly woman. And it's interesting of them, like, she talks about advice to some. She talks about the lives with the others. They do so many different things, right? They have so many conversations. And I love seeing all these conversations with women of different ages and different points in their life. And I feel like that brings so much to it. Like, I would even love to see something like this in a male perspective as well. But I feel like it adds so much more to see so many points of life by women. And this is so beautiful. This talks about friendship, and our main character doesn't really have friends at school, but she's not like an outcast or a lone wolf either. Like, she's friendly enough. They say hi back and forth, but she doesn't have any true deep connections with them. And I think that's something a lot of us can relate to, where we wouldn't necessarily be the lone wolf or completely outcasted. But, sometimes you just don't make connections to the peers around you. And I love this. I read this like so fast, and the artwork is beautiful. We have a great sidekick cat that basically there through her entire journey is beautiful. I love it so, so much. And the way, like, it talks about depression, about societal pressures, and an older woman giving advice, and even an older woman going through health issues in later stages in her life. Man. Like, I know I keep saying reading all of these except for, like, The Tale of Two Cities, but this one's amazing too. This one is so amazing as well. And I want to check out so much more by the author, because the 2 things I have read have been absolutely stellar. Okay, so the next one I read, I enjoyed this as well. Maybe not as much as the other, like, 4 I've mentioned, but definitely better than The Tale of Two Cities. And this is probably the most popular book on the list, and I know I'm late. I have not seen the movie to this either, but I've heard the movie's good, called The Martian. So this is the first book I've read by Andy Weir. I think that's how you say it, Weir. Artemis has been like on my radar for a little while because I'm obsessed with like moons and stuff, and Artemis has like a moon on the cover, but I just hadn't gotten around to it, right? And I decided to pick up this a chance. So our main character is stuck on Mars by himself, and everybody presumes he's dead, and there's like a hub thing with resources, and they've had training about what would happen if you had to plan or you had to do this or you had to do that. And so that becomes handy. Our main character is so resilient and so smart. It's just like incredible. I was just like, I would just panic, but I mean, I guess lucky enough he's had some training for this. And there was a lot of technical scientific terms kind of thrown in this book, and I didn't get the gist of it, and I kind of glossed over when things got a little too technical, but it did not kill this book for me. Like, I think if you're like a science whiz or something, this would definitely like be a thing you would truly, truly like about this book. But those were the parts that I kind of like glossed over. So, I mean, this couldn't be a 5 stars because of that. But I don't read too many books that are actually set out in like space. Like, I read like the Lunar Chronicles, but that's completely fictionalized. And this is supposed to be more realistic, and I don't think I've read any book like that. So this is definitely like unique in that aspect for me. Even though like our character is so smart, so resilient, and he doesn't waste too much time like focusing on what's wrong, which I think is admirable. He just gets to work to do what he needs to do to survive. I don't think this book is very like character driven. It is very plot driven. So if you need super, super good connections with the characters, this may not be the book for you. But if you just want like a good story, this is definitely it. I do think towards the end it dragged. I don't think the actual ending dragged, but maybe like the third, fourth of the book area like dragged a little bit. So I thought this was a good book, and I'm interested in the movie. But is it my favorite book? No. But I definitely see why this book got popular, except for I'm surprised so many people like the technical aspect of this. But hey, sometimes people can surprise you. So I left the next book downstairs, and I don't feel like getting it. So it is called The Tattoo Murder Case, and this is a Japanese book. And this is like a thriller mystery. So as I mentioned with other like thriller mysteries in the past, I don't feel good talking about too much of the plot, because once you if something kind of spoils like a twist or a clue or something, it kind of kills those type of books, right? I didn't really care for this one as much. I don't think it was bad. I thought the idea was interesting, but I don't know if it was like translation or if it's just not for me, but some stuff felt kind of flat. Like, sometimes it would talk about, like, months passing or days passing, but then it was, like, really hard. Like, it felt like, and this could just be a translation issue, but it didn't feel cohesive, and the timing, like, the time structure just seemed kind of off, and that's just, like, one example of, like, the translation issues that I think are translation issues. And as I've been reading more translated books, like, I know that is a hard job, and I appreciate them so much, but sometimes, a bad translation can kind of kill some of the story. I don't usually read detective novels, so that was also a new type of kind of read for me. And I do think this book does a great job of the atmosphere and feeling creepy, and I do think the actual story itself is really gripping, and you just want to keep going, which is something you want out of a thriller, right? And man, like, this book actually like does grab you. If like those little things don't like stick out to you, I think like this would be like a phenomenal book. But it's still a good book, and the atmosphere, the darkness, I wouldn't say noir, but kind of like noir, that is done so well. And I did have a blast reading this. And this is like post-World War II, I think, in Japan. And, they find the dead body, and they have like the person examining the tattoos and stuff. And it's just, the whole idea is so interesting and so unique that if you're really into thrillers, come to see The Killer and then just like find out more about culture and like the tattoos and the noir and all of that. Like, this is something like I do think I would recommend, even though it's not like my favorite book, especially if you're like into thrillers. But I'm not a super big thriller or detective novel fan, as I mentioned, so I don't know where this sticks with like some of the bigger names. But someone who doesn't read as many, I did enjoy it. So, take that for what it is. Okay, so the next one was an essay collection, and I've read like another one by the same author, but it's Men Explain Things to Me. I actually listened to this on audiobook because it's free on Audible Plus, and I just wanted to read something different. I didn't want something that was like plot driven, just because I've been reading so many books in such a short amount of time. And like I said, I've read another essay collection by this author, so I kind of knew how she wrote. And this one, I don't think it's bad. I think this is a fine book if you're like new to feminism, but she didn't go into enough details, enough like nuances to explain things. And she did try to be inclusive, and she did try to like talk about a variety of subjects, which I do appreciate. Like, she does talk about like how Native American women are killed and raped at a really, really high rate. And she does mention that like there are weird laws about like who can get in trouble when they do stuff on a reservation or when they do stuff off a reservation. But I wish with some of that stuff she would go into more detail instead of just like kind of brushing over it. And she does talk about like Muslim women, and she talks about like the Iraqi war. She talks about women here, and she talks a lot about rape culture. So if that's a trigger, that is there, even though I don't think she goes into that much detail. But I have read better essays and better like nonfiction feminist books. So I don't think this one hit the mark for me. And her main thing about Men Explain Things to Me, like she's talking about like a man explaining this book that she actually ended up writing, but he didn't realize she wrote it. I don't know if that was like, I understand why she talked about that story, but I just felt like there could be so much more in this essay collection than what we got. And as I said, I don't think it's bad at all, but if you're not super new to these topics, I don't think you'll get that much out of it, to be honest. And and like that doesn't necessarily make it bad. It's just, it is what it is, right? There's this one part that I almost like went on to the next book without, and it just popped back in my head. I didn't really like how she said violence has a gender. Like, I know men, like typically cis men, have a higher reported violent rate towards women, like cis women and trans women, than most groups. But she didn't go into nuances about like, yes, she did mention, yes, what some women do attack men, but she doesn't go into like toxic masculinity about how men are told to never report this because women are, not all women, but a lot of women are physically weaker, especially like cis women, than like maybe like a cis man. So you shouldn't report it because it's not a big deal, and just take it. And you want to be seen like a man. And this was written before like the Amber Heard's case, like about how like she was really abusive to Johnny Depp, and how like that just kind of got brushed under the rug because she's a woman. And feminism is about intersexuality and equality for all genders. I always want to say genders, but genders. And I kind of wish she would elaborate more on that. Like, yes, like statistically, men do most of the violence, and maybe they do. But I think when you talk about these things, we need to talk about toxic masculinity, about how men are taught just to kind of like act instead of communicate. And then when something happens, they got to kind of keep it to themselves. And this happens with rape culture with men as well. And that was something that kind of didn't hit me right. Like when you have these conversations, I think that should be mentioned. that men are basically told just to hush it down. And even if it does happen at a lower rate to men, those victims are still important and they should still be talked about. And like when bad things happen, they deserve justice just as well. And like we need to also talk about like the violence towards trans women as well. Like, I mean, we talk about violence towards every group, but I feel like she didn't hit on that enough. And I think she was trying to be intersectional, but it felt kind of flat, as I mentioned, with like the Native American women. Like she just didn't go enough detail. She just kind of like passed it by, and it almost felt like she was just trying to hit a check mark. But I don't think these were supposed to be in-depth conversation. It just kind of felt like feminism 101. I know I almost just went on to the next book without mentioning that, but I thought, yeah, maybe I should mention that. I finished Swamp Thing. I read 5 and 6. Yes, these are graphic novels by DC. I've been reading Alan Moore's Swamp Thing for a while. I originally wanted to binge these, but I just really wanted to sit there and enjoy them as well. And book 5 was really good. I think it was interesting. There are new artists that are in book 5, but the art style is close enough to feel cohesive. And I didn't really notice at first until like, I forgot what pointed it out, but something kind of pointed out a little bit. And, I don't mind the artist change if the style is consistent enough. And this definitely hits the mark. Especially with, like, this era of comics, there's definitely a lot more dialogue, a lot more writing. And I appreciate that. Well, it's not just, like, like, I know you're supposed to show more than tell, but sometimes you need to be able to read stuff and get more out of it that way. And I've been reading more modern stuff, so it was nice to get some of that. And I think this is probably my second favorite in the 6 that I read. I do think the first one is the strongest, and you get a lot of the horror elements and the supernatural. And I think it's interesting that Swamp Thing's lover gets trialed for things with animals, even though, like, he was a human, and wouldn't he be considered more of a plant than an animal? But I don't know. I think that was an interesting element, and I think he talks about, like, the way society views, like, sex and sexual morality, and there's a lot of Batman in this. So if you like to see the old Batman, he's in here. Swamp Thing that has a thing happen to him, and it devastates Abby, which is his lover, and then Abby stays with a friend, and her boyfriend is abusive. And I really think Alan Moore has a way to talk about society and all the social commentary. And yeah, I liked book 5 so much. So book 6, I did not like. I think Alan Moore should have stopped with book 5. That is just my opinion. I don't know if that's a common opinion or uncommon. I don't know. I don't care. I don't care if it's popular or not. But I really think Alan Moore should have stopped with book 5. I don't think any of the stories in this were badly written. But it honestly felt like Swamp Thing's story, at least with the way Alan Moore was writing it, should have ended in book 5. And this one just felt more like science fiction-y instead of horror, and it just felt completely different. And it just kind of took me out of it, especially since I read these back to back. Maybe if I spread these out more like I did the other ones. But when you have a story flow a certain way and everything, and the thing just changes, and like, but the author has it, it just feels weird. Everything kind of feels more like, I know a lot of this stuff is important to Swamp Things, like lore and blah, 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 but it just felt like side crap, and I just kind of didn't care, to be honest. But I kept like drifting out of it, like it wouldn't keep my attention. And that makes me so sad, because the other 5 were so, so good, and this one just fell flat for me. So the next book, I'm surprised I'm just getting to now, because Ellen Hopkins is one of my favorite authors of all time, and I try to buy all her books as soon as they come out. But when I got into her, she did have like 4 or 5 books that are already out, and I don't keep up with her nonfiction stuff. She has nonfiction books, but her young adult and her adult books, basically since I've gotten into her, and like when I was 13, I was in the 7th grade, so yeah, 13 with Crank. I've been buying them basically as they released, or I get somebody to get it for me for Christmas or my birthday, depending on the book and the situation, right? And when this came out, I had it pre-ordered. Some reason I didn't read it as fast as I've read the others. And this was like her first middle grade book, and she has 2 books coming out this fall, like one in September and one in November, and I am excited for those, and I will plan on reading those as soon as they come out because it is Ellen Hopkins. I have met her before. She is a very nice lady, and this is Closer to Nowhere. So this is her first middle grade book, and it's based on 2 cousins named Hannah and Cal, and sometimes in some of her books she has multiple POVs, and like depending on the book, depends on whether that's a strength or not. And I think she does a better job. I think whatever criticism she got for like Fallout, which I think is her weak, like these 2 aren't the only ones that have multiple points of view, but I think Fallout was probably her weakest one that had multiple POVs. I think she improved so much. Like there feels like a distinct character difference because like your characters have like different personality traits or different life experiences. If you're going to do multiple POVs, you got to make them feel actually different, like actual different characters, and you don't feel like you're just reading like the same character, just wording things differently or supposedly being different. And I've read books where that falls short, but I think this as well. And Cal moves in with Hannah. Like I said, they're cousins, and their moms are twins. And Cal's mom dies of cancer, and his father has drug issues, and Cal has a lot of PTSD, and Hannah tries to be understanding because Cal is dealing with a lot, and he's a kid, so he's acting out. He doesn't know how to like express his emotions or how to handle things. Honestly, even as adults, we suck at this as well. And if you're looking for like, you know, I saw this like actually like as a common question because Ellen Hopkins isn't afraid to cuss and stuff in her books. No, this does not have any profanity or anything that a child can't read. So this is middle grade, so I don't know why you like necessarily, but at the same time, if her other books had it, but at the same time, this is middle grade. But here, I'm just going to put that out there. The only weakness is like, you know, Cal kind of like grows and he changes, right? But I feel like it kind of happens a little too rapidly. To be honest, like I kind of wish like his progression or his character progression was a little slower. But I think like a really good strength about this book is because it is for middle grade. Ellen Hopkins, she's always been good at handling tough subjects, right? And I think, and this is just my opinion, she handles the subjects of like all the stuff that's in this book very well that I think is digestible to like a younger audience that's even like not teenage age. And it's interesting seeing like their grandmother comes to visit, and I don't know how many people's had this experience, but I've definitely had this where you've had like a grandmother who kind of treats like your cousin better, or maybe you're the cousin who was treated better than the other cousin. But I have been in that situation where I had like a grandmother, not the one that raised me, but you know, maybe there was some, like, in this book in particular, she had issues with Cal's mother before she died and never, like, reconciled. And she kind of takes that out on Cal and doesn't treat the cousins equally, even though they're both her grandchildren. And Cal thinks everything's his fault, even though he's a child, and nothing really is his fault. And I like how Ellen Hopkins handled this because survivor's guilt is a thing too. Even though his mother had cancer and he couldn't do anything, he feels left behind and he feels bad. He feels bad for a lot of things, and I think it's navigated very well. And it's also interesting seeing how Cal deals with his father because, you know, there's prison visitations and he's not happy with his dad, which he has every right not to be. And yeah, like, This is interesting. I think, I mean, I don't read so much middle grade that I can like be like, hey, this is like what you got to do. And I know I have a bias towards Ellen Hopkins, but I love when middle grades handle very tough subjects at a digestible manner for kids. And I think this does this very well. She has another middle grade coming out soon, and I'm so excited to see how she does with that. And then she has like a young adult like she normally does. This is also written in verse, like all but like 2 books of hers, I believe, are written in verse. There might be 3, but this does fit like the verse format of most of her other books. And I think that's one reason why, like, I know this isn't a review for Fallout, but like Fallout fell short because I think it would probably be harder to write a whole story in verse anyways, and then when you do multiple points of view. And so, yeah, this looks like a thick book, but it's really not because, you know, she has her like format, the way she does things, and that's one thing I've always loved about Ellen Hopkins. And she was the first author that I've read like from that's in verse that wasn't straight up poetry. I've been getting into it more because I've realized I really love that format and that style of writing. But yeah, like I think her writing in this is just as beautiful as her other books. And I know I'm walking around in circles, but yeah, I definitely think this is great. And this is definitely like kid friendly, which is the point of it being middle grade. But I have seen that on the internet because of her other topics in the past. So guys, that is it. I read 31 books in 31 days. I need a nap. I need a nap. So guys, I will see you later. If you read any of these books, talk about it to me down below. If you haven't read them but want to, tell me. If you've done this challenge, let me know. I am interested in hearing who else hates themselves. See you guys.